The sky wept a soft spring rain as Flora Newsom stood at the edge of her father's property, watching the storm clouds roll across the distant plains like a herd of wild stallions. The year was 1876, and the telegram clutched in her trembling hand had just shattered what little security remained in her young life. "Papa, please," Flora whispered, her voice carrying over the wind as she turned to face her father. At 20 years old, she had grown accustomed to hardship since her mother's passing 3 years prior, but nothing had prepared her for this. There must be another way. Harrison Newsom's weathered face betrayed no emotion as he stared at the horizon, his once proud shoulders now stooped with the burden of debt. The drought had devastated their small ranch outside of Copper Creek, Colorado, and the bank had finally called in their loans. "There ain't no other way, Flora," he said, his voice cracking. "Tucker Blackburn is offering to pay off every cent we owe. All he wants in return is me," Flora finished, her stomach twisting into knots. She'd seen Tucker Blackburn in town, had felt his cold, calculating gaze following her through the general store. His reputation as the most feared cattle baron in 3 counties preceded him. Stories of his ruthlessness toward rustlers, competitors, and even his own men had earned him the nickname the Wolf of Copper Creek. "It's just marriage, girl," her father said, not meeting her eyes. "You'll have fine clothes, a big house. You'll never go hungry." Flora closed her eyes, feeling the raindrops mingle with her tears. "He's a monster, Papa. Everyone knows what happened to the Hamilton family when they refused to sell their water rights. Their barn mysteriously burned down, and their youngest boy almost died." "Rumors," her father muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. A week later, Flora stood in the parlor of their modest home, wearing her mother's wedding dress, which hung loosely on her slender frame. Mrs. Peterson, their neighbor, had done her best to take it in, but there hadn't been time for proper alterations. The ceremony was to take place at noon, and the grandfather clock in the corner ticked away her remaining minutes of freedom. "You look beautiful," her father said from the doorway, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. "Your mama would be proud." Flora bit back a retort. Her mother would never have allowed this arrangement, but Catherine Newsom had been dead 3 years now, and with her had gone much of her father's backbone. "He's here," Harrison announced, stepping aside as the front door swung open. Tucker Blackburn filled the doorframe, tall and broad-shouldered. At 35, his face was tanned and lined from years under the harsh western sun, his dark hair peppered with premature gray at the temples. He wore a black suit that accentuated his intimidating presence, and the gun holstered at his hip gleamed in the afternoon light. When his eyes met Flora's, she felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something unreadable in those shadowed depths, something that made her want to run and hide. "Miss Newsom," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You look lovely." Flora couldn't bring herself to respond. Her throat had gone dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a justice of the peace who seemed eager to finish and be on his way. Flora's fingers trembled so violently that Tucker had to help her slide the ring onto her finger. When the justice pronounced them man and wife, Tucker leaned down and pressed his lips briefly against hers. Flora stood rigid, unable to reciprocate. "We'll be leaving immediately," Tucker announced to Harrison as he signed the marriage certificate. "I've had your daughter's things packed and loaded in the wagon." Flora turned to her father, panic rising in her chest. "Now, but I thought best not to prolong goodbyes," Tucker cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There's a storm coming, and I want to reach the ranch before dark." Her father embraced her awkwardly, whispering, "Be a good wife to him, Flora. Maybe in time." She couldn't finish his thought. Maybe in time what? She'd learned to love a man she feared, a man who'd essentially purchased her to settle her father's debts. The journey to the Blackburn Ranch took nearly 3 hours, made in uncomfortable silence. Flora sat rigidly on the wagon seat, keeping as much distance between herself and her new husband as possible. Tucker drove with competent hands, occasionally glancing her way but making no attempt at conversation. As they crested a hill, Tucker finally spoke. "That's Blackburn land as far as you can see," he said, gesturing to the vast expanse of grassland stretching before them. 20,000 acres. The finest grazing land in Colorado. Flora said nothing, but her eyes widened at the sheer scale of his holdings. In the distance, she could see a large 2-story house standing alone against the backdrop of the mountains, smoke curling from its chimney. "Home," Tucker said simply. It was indeed the largest house Flora had ever seen outside of Denver. Constructed of sturdy timber and stone, it stood as a testament to Tucker Blackburn's wealth and power. As they approached, several ranch hands appeared, taking the horses and unloading Flora's modest trunk. An older woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you got back," she said, her sharp eyes assessing Flora. "Storm's coming in fast." "Mrs. Winters, this is my wife, Flora," Tucker said. "Flora, this is Mrs. Winters, our housekeeper." The woman gave a curt nod. "Got your room ready and supper's on the stove. Better come in before the rain starts again." Flora followed them into the house, overwhelmed by its size and grandeur. The entryway opened into a spacious living area with a massive stone fireplace. Expensive-looking rugs covered the polished wooden floors, and oil lamps cast a warm glow throughout the room. "I'll show you to your room," Tucker said, leading her up a wide staircase. "My room?" Flora questioned, confused. "Don't you mean our room?" A flicker of something was it discomfort crossed Tucker's face. "No, your room. The master bedroom is at the end of the hall. Yours is here." He opened a door to reveal a beautifully appointed bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a washstand, and a small sitting area near the window. "I thought you might want some time to adjust." Flora stared at him, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected consideration. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. Tucker nodded once. "Supper is in an hour. Mrs. Winters will show you downstairs when it's ready." Then he was gone, closing the door behind him. Flora sank onto the edge of the bed, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This wasn't what she had expected. She had braced herself for the worst for a man who would claim his husbandly rights immediately, who would treat her as property to be used. Instead, Tucker Blackburn had given her space, privacy. It didn't align with the stories she'd heard about him. But perhaps, she thought darkly, this was just another form of control. Give her a beautiful cage, make her feel safe, and then... A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Winters entered without waiting for a response, carrying Flora's trunk. "Not much in here," the housekeeper remarked, setting it down. "Mr. Blackburn said to tell you there's fabric in town. He'll take you next week to order proper clothes." "That's very kind," Flora said cautiously. Mrs. Winters gave her a long, appraising look. "He's not what you're expecting, is he?" "I don't know what to expect," Flora admitted. "He's a complicated man, Mr. Blackburn, not one for many words, and God knows he can be hard as nails when crossed." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "But he's fair, and he keeps his promises." "Did he promise you to say that?" Flora couldn't help asking. To her surprise, Mrs. Winters laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Girl, nobody tells me what to say, not even Tucker Blackburn. I've known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I'll speak my mind till they put me in the ground." She turned to leave. "Supper in an hour. Don't be late. He can't abide tardiness. Dinner was a strained affair. The dining room was impressive, with a table large enough to seat 12, though only 3 places were set, one at each end and one in the middle. Tucker sat at the head, Flora at the middle, and Mrs. Winters at the far end. The food was plentiful and well-prepared: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from what Mrs. Winters proudly called the finest kitchen garden in the county. Flora found she had little appetite, pushing food around her plate as Tucker ate methodically, his eyes occasionally lifting to study her. "Is the food not to your liking?" he asked after watching her play with her potatoes for several minutes. "It's very good," Flora responded automatically. "I'm just not very hungry." Tucker nodded, accepting her answer without pressing. "Mrs. Winters is the best cook in 3 counties. You'll find everything here is of the highest quality." "Everything except the company, perhaps," Flora muttered under her breath. Tucker's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and Flora immediately regretted her words. She tensed, waiting for his anger, but instead a strange expression crossed his face, almost like amusement. "You have spirit," he observed. "Good. Life out here isn't kind to the weak." Mrs. Winters snorted from her end of the table. "Lord help us, there's 2 of them now." After dinner, Tucker excused himself to attend to some business in his study, leaving Flora to explore the house. She wandered from room to room, taking in the evidence of Tucker's wealth and taste. The furnishings were expensive but not ostentatious, the decorations minimal but tasteful. It was the home of a man who valued quality over showiness. In the library, she found shelves of books: classics, history, poetry, and practical volumes on ranching and agriculture. She ran her fingers along the spines, surprised to find many of her own favorites among them. "You can borrow any you like." Tucker's voice came from behind her, making her jump. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." "I didn't hear you come in," Flora said, her hand pressed against her racing heart. "Old habit, moving quietly," he gestured to the books. "Do you read much?" Flora nodded. "My mother taught me to love books. We didn't have many, but what we had I read over and over." Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, a softening, perhaps. "My mother was the same. These were mostly hers. She brought them west when my father decided to try his luck ranching." This glimpse into his past intrigued Flora despite herself. "Where are your parents now?" "Both gone. Father died of pneumonia when I was 16. Mother followed a year later." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Flora caught a hint of old pain beneath the words. "That's when I took over the ranch. It was much smaller then." "You've built quite an empire," Flora observed, unable to keep a note of accusation from her voice. Tucker's expression hardened slightly. "I've worked for everything I have, and taken what others couldn't protect." His jaw tightened. "You've heard stories. Everyone in Copper Creek has heard stories about Tucker Blackburn." He studied her for a long moment. "Stories have a way of growing in the telling." Without another word, he turned and left the library, leaving Flora alone with the books and her conflicted thoughts. That night, as a fierce thunderstorm raged outside, Flora lay awake in her new bed, listening to the wind howl around the eaves. The room, for all its luxury, felt alien and cold. She thought of her father, alone in their small house, and wondered if he regretted his decision yet. She wondered if Tucker Blackburn regretted his. Thunder crashed overhead, and a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. Flora pulled the quilts tighter around herself, fighting back tears. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness in this place. But in the darkness, with only the storm as witness, she let the tears come. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Flora dressed in one of her simple cotton dresses and made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and bacon to the kitchen. Mrs. Winters was already busy at the stove. "About time you got up. Sun's been up for an hour already." "I'm sorry," Flora said automatically. "I didn't sleep well." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Storm kept half the county awake, I'd wager. Sit down, have some breakfast. Mr. Blackburn's been out since dawn, checking fences." "Storm like that always brings damage." Flora accepted a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon, realizing she was actually hungry this morning. "Does he always work alongside his men?" Mrs. Winters nodded. "Never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. It's why they respect him, even if they fear him a bit too." "And should I fear him?" Flora asked boldly. The housekeeper gave her a measured look. "That depends on who you are. His enemies have reason to fear him. His friends don't." She turned back to the stove. "Question is, which are you going to be?" Flora had no answer for that. After breakfast, she decided to explore the grounds. The ranch house sat on a slight rise, providing a commanding view of the surrounding land. To the east stretched the vast grazing pastures Tucker had pointed out yesterday. To the north, she could see corrals, a large barn, bunkhouses, and various outbuildings that made up the working heart of the ranch. She walked toward the barn, drawn by the sounds of activity. Inside, several ranch hands were working with horses. They fell silent when she entered, removing their hats and nodding respectfully. "Madam," one man said, stepping forward. He was older than the others, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "I'm Hank Peterson, foreman here at Blackburn Ranch. We didn't get the chance to meet yesterday." "Flora Blackburn," she said, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Peterson." "Just Hank, madam. Everyone around here calls me Hank." He gestured to the others. "This here's Caleb, Miguel, and that young buck over there is Jimmy." The men nodded in greeting, looking slightly uncomfortable in her presence. Flora realized they probably had no idea how to interact with their boss's new wife. "Please, don't let me interrupt your work," she said. "I'm just exploring my new home. Would you like a tour of the ranch, madam?" Hank offered. "Mr. Blackburn asked me to show you around when you felt up to it." Flora was surprised by this consideration. "That would be lovely, thank you." Hank proved to be an excellent guide, explaining the operation of the ranch with obvious pride. The Blackburn spread was indeed impressive: over 500 head of cattle, 30 working horses, and enough land to support twice that number if needed. 20 men worked the ranch full-time, with additional hands hired during roundup and branding. "Mr. Blackburn runs the tightest ship in the territory," Hank explained as they walked. "Every man knows his job, and every job gets done right." "And if it doesn't?" Flora couldn't help asking. Hank gave her a sidelong glance. "Then that man finds himself looking for work elsewhere." "Mr. Blackburn doesn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty." "Is he harsh with the men?" The foreman considered this. "Fair is the word I'd use. Demanding, yes, but fair. He expects a lot because he gives a lot." Hank pointed to a collection of small cabins beyond the bunkhouse. "Those are for the married hands. Most ranchers don't bother with such things, expect men to leave their families behind or not have them at all. Mr. Blackburn built those himself, said a man works better when his family's close." This didn't align with the picture Flora had formed of Tucker Blackburn. "You seem to admire him," she observed. "Been with him 15 years, madam. Seen him build this place from nearly nothing. Seen him make hard choices, too." Hank's face grew serious. "People in town, they tell stories. Some true, some not so much. But I'll tell you this: I've never seen him do anything that wasn't necessary to protect what's his." As they approached the main corral, Flora spotted Tucker on a magnificent black stallion, putting the animal through its paces. Man and horse moved as one, a study in controlled power. Despite herself, Flora found the sight impressive. Tucker noticed them and brought the horse to a halt, dismounting with easy grace. He handed the reins to a waiting ranch hand and strode toward them, removing his gloves, showing Mrs. Blackburn around, he asked Hank. Yes, sir, just giving her the grand tour, Tucker nodded. Thank you. His eyes met Flora's. How do you find it? It's very impressive, she admitted truthfully. You've built something remarkable here. Something like satisfaction flickered in his expression. Thank you. Would you like to see the rest of it? We could ride out after lunch if you're comfortable on horseback. I'm a rancher's daughter, Mr. Blackburn, Flora said with a lift of her chin. I've been riding since I could walk. A corner of his mouth quirked upward, not quite a smile, but the closest she'd seen yet. I'll have Hank saddle a gentle mare for you. I don't need a gentle mare, Flora said, perhaps more sharply than she'd intended. I can handle a proper horse. This time, Tucker did smile, briefly but genuinely. The expression transformed his stern face, softening the hard lines and lighting his eyes. Very well, Mrs. Blackburn, a proper horse it is. True to his word, after lunch, Tucker led her to the corral where a beautiful chestnut mare awaited, tacked and ready. The animal was spirited but well-trained, responding immediately to Flora's commands as they rode out across the rolling grasslands. Tucker set a comfortable pace, pointing out landmarks and boundaries as they traveled. The day was perfect for riding warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, and clear blue skies that seemed to stretch forever. That ridge marks the eastern boundary, Tucker explained, pointing to a distant line of hills. Beyond that is Harrington land. Jeremiah Harrington, Flora asked. I've heard that name in town. Tucker's expression darkened slightly. Yes, we've had disagreements over the years. About water rights, Flora guessed, recalling snippets of gossip she'd overheard in the general store, among other things. Tucker's tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. They rode in silence for a while, cresting a hill that provided a panoramic view of the valley below. Tucker reined his horse to a stop, and Flora did the same, taking in the breathtaking vista. It's beautiful, she said softly. Tucker nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with obvious pride. First time I saw this valley, I knew this was where I wanted to build my life. I was 19, working as a hand for old man Garson. His ranch was just a few hundred acres then, nothing special, but I could see what it could be. So you bought him out? Flora asked. Eventually. Worked for him 5 years, saved every penny. When he decided to move back east, I made him an offer. Tucker's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. Most folks thought I was crazy, taking on that much debt for land that hadn't produced much, but I knew what it needed. Despite herself, Flora was curious. What was that? Water. Tucker pointed to a series of windmills and dammed creeks visible in the valley. This land gets enough rain, but it doesn't hold it well. I spent 2 years digging irrigation ditches and building small dams to catch the runoff from the mountains. Changed everything. Flora could hear the quiet pride in his voice. This wasn't a man who had stumbled into wealth or inherited it. He had built it through vision and hard work. Is that why people resent you? She asked. Because you succeeded where others failed. Tucker turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Some, perhaps. Others resent me because I wouldn't sell to them when they decided my land was valuable after all. And some. He paused. Some believe things about me that aren't true, like what happened to the Hamilton family. His jaw tightened. I had nothing to do with that fire. But you benefited from it, Flora pressed. They sold to you afterward, didn't they? At a fair price, Tucker said firmly. More than fair. I made sure their boy got the medical care he needed in Denver, paid for it myself. This was news to Flora. The town gossip had never included this detail. Why would you do that if you weren't responsible? Tucker's eyes met hers directly. Because it was the right thing to do. Because no child should suffer for the mistakes of others. Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge of such suffering. Before she could question him further, dark clouds began gathering on the western horizon. "Storm's coming," Tucker observed. "We should head back." They rode hard, racing the approaching weather. The first fat raindrops began to fall when they were still a mile from the ranch house. By the time they reached the barn, they were both soaked through. "You're a good rider," Tucker remarked as he helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Better than good." "My father raised cattle before the drought," Flora explained, suddenly aware of their proximity. Water dripped from Tucker's hat brim, and his shirt clung to the broad planes of his chest. She took a step back, disconcerted by the odd flutter in her stomach. "You should get inside, get dry," Tucker said, seeming to notice her discomfort. "Don't want you catching cold." Flora nodded and hurried toward the house, confusion swirling in her mind. The man she'd spent the day with didn't match the cold, calculating figure she'd feared. Tucker Blackburn was certainly stern and reserved, but she'd seen glimpses of something else: pride in his achievements, consideration for his workers, and a deep connection to the land he'd shaped with his own hands. But then, why did people fear him so? Why did his name cause conversations to halt when he entered the general store in town? What was the truth behind the stories? Mrs. Winters clucked disapprovingly when Flora entered the kitchen, dripping water onto the clean floor. "Look at you, soaked to the skin. Upstairs with you now, before you catch your death. I'll bring up hot water for a bath." Flora didn't argue, grateful for the prospect of warm water and dry clothes. In her room, she peeled off her wet garments, wrapping herself in a thick robe that had been left hanging on the back of the door. It was clearly new, made of soft, expensive material, another unexpected consideration from her husband. The hot bath restored her spirits, and by the time she dressed in a clean, simple dress and made her way downstairs, the rain had stopped and evening was approaching. She found Tucker in the library, reading by the light of an oil lamp. He looked up when she entered, closing his book. "Feeling better? You were quite wet." "Much better, thank you." Flora hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether her presence was welcome. Tucker gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please join me if you'd like, unless you prefer to rest in your room." Flora moved to the indicated chair, settling into its comfortable embrace. "What are you reading?" He held up the book, a volume of Emerson's essays. "My mother's favorite. She used to read passages aloud in the evenings." A shadow crossed his face, some old memory perhaps. "My mother loved poetry," Flora offered. "Wordsworth especially." Tucker nodded toward the bookshelves. "There's a volume of his collected works, third shelf from the bottom, I believe." Flora rose to look, finding the book exactly where he'd indicated. She brought it back to her chair, surprised by this small connection between them. "She would read to me when I couldn't sleep," Flora continued, running her fingers over the leather binding. "The rhythm of the words always soothed me." "You were close to her," Tucker observed. "Yes, her death changed everything." Flora swallowed hard, remembering how quickly their lives had unraveled after Catherine Newsom succumbed to influenza. "My father was never the same." "Grief can break a man," Tucker said quietly, "or it can forge him into something stronger." "Which did it do to you?" Flora asked, sensing he spoke from experience. Tucker was silent for a long moment. "Both, perhaps. When my parents died, I had nothing but this land and a mountain of debt. I couldn't afford the luxury of remaining broken." There was a wealth of unspoken story in those simple sentences, the struggle of a young man alone in the world, fighting to hold onto his birthright. "Is that why you're so determined?" Flora asked. Why people fear crossing you. Tucker's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. I protect what's mine, Mrs. Blackburn. I've had to. In this territory, weakness invites predators. And are you a predator, Mr. Blackburn? His expression remained unreadable. What do you think? Flora considered her answer carefully. I think you're a man who's built walls around himself so high that few people know what's truly on the other side. Something shifted in Tucker's gaze, surprise, perhaps, that she'd seen so clearly. Before he could respond, Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway, announcing that dinner was served. Dinner conversation remained polite but superficial, with Mrs. Winters doing most of the talking, regaling Flora with stories of the ranch's early days and the challenges Tucker had overcome. Flora listened with interest, piecing together a more complete picture of the man she'd married. After the meal, Tucker excused himself to attend to some paperwork, leaving Flora once again to her own devices. She returned to the library, selecting a novel from the shelves and settling in to read. The house creaked and settled around her, still unfamiliar but becoming less threatening with each passing hour. When she finally retired to her room, Flora found herself lingering at the window, gazing out at the starlit landscape. This land that Tucker loved so fiercely was beautiful, she had to admit. In the moonlight, the rolling hills and distant mountains took on an almost magical quality. A movement below caught her attention. Tucker, walking alone toward the corral, his figure silhouetted against the night sky. He stood at the fence for a long time, so still he might have been carved from stone. What thoughts occupied him in these solitary moments? What burdens did he carry that kept him from sleep? Flora turned away from the window, troubled by the unexpected stirring of compassion in her heart. She had come to the Blackburn Ranch prepared to hate Tucker, to endure her marriage as a form of imprisonment. She hadn't expected to find him complex, thoughtful, or capable of consideration. She hadn't expected to find herself wondering what lay behind those quiet, watchful eyes. Days passed, settling into a routine of sorts. Flora learned the rhythms of the ranch: breakfast at dawn, the men riding out soon after, lunch at midday, dinner at sunset. Tucker was often absent during the days, attending to the 1,000 tasks that keeping such a large operation running smoothly required. When present, he was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance. Flora found ways to occupy herself exploring the house and grounds, reading from Tucker's extensive library, and gradually taking on some household responsibilities from Mrs. Winters, who accepted her help with grudging approval. "Never thought I'd see the day," the housekeeper remarked one afternoon as Flora helped prepare vegetables for dinner. A Blackburn woman with sense enough to know which end of a knife to hold. Were there others? Flora asked, curious about Tucker's past. Mrs. Winters snorted. "No others, girl. Just his mother, God rest her soul. Woman was a saint but hopeless in a kitchen, more at home with books than beets." She eyed Flora appraisingly. "You're managing both, seems like." It was the closest thing to a compliment Flora had received from the stern woman, and she found herself oddly pleased by it. A week after her arrival, Tucker announced at breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. "Would you care to accompany me?" he asked Flora. "We could see about ordering those new clothes for you." Flora hesitated only briefly. The prospect of visiting town, of seeing something beyond the ranch boundaries, was tempting. "Yes, I'd like that." They set out after breakfast in Tucker's wagon. The journey into Copper Creek took nearly 2 hours, during which Tucker pointed out various landmarks and neighboring properties. As they approached the town, Flora found herself growing nervous, wondering how people would react to seeing her as Mrs. Blackburn. Her concerns proved well-founded. As they drove down Copper Creek's main street, conversations halted, and people stared openly. Some nodded respectfully to Tucker, but most quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. The fear and wariness were palpable. Tucker seemed either oblivious to or unconcerned by the reactions. He stopped the wagon in front of Jennings' general store, coming around to help Flora down with that same careful courtesy he always showed her. "I need to speak with Mr. Jennings about an order of fencing wire," he told her. "Why don't you look at the dress goods, Mrs. Jennings can help you select patterns and fabrics." Inside the store, the few customers present suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. Mrs. Jennings, a plump, nervous woman in her 50s, hurried forward. "Mr. Blackburn," she said, her voice slightly higher than natural. "How can we help you today?" "My wife needs new dresses," Tucker said simply. "Please show her your fabrics and patterns. She's to have whatever she wants." Mrs. Jennings turned to Flora with obvious curiosity. "Of course. Right this way, Mrs. Blackburn." As Tucker moved to speak with Mr. Jennings at the back of the store, Mrs. Jennings led Flora to the fabric section, immediately becoming more relaxed once Tucker was out of earshot. "We've got some lovely new calicos just arrived from Denver," she said, pulling bolts from the shelves. "And this blue would complement your coloring beautifully." Flora thanked her, examining the fabrics with genuine appreciation. Her wardrobe had been painfully limited since her mother's death, and the prospect of new, pretty dresses was admittedly appealing. As they discussed patterns and trimmings, Flora became aware of whispered conversations nearby. Two women, pretending to examine canned goods, were watching her and speaking in low tones. "Poor thing, sold by her father to that monster. What choice did she have? Wonder if she knows about the Wilkins boy." Flora stiffened, their words carrying clearly in the quiet store. Mrs. Jennings shot the women a warning glance, but the damage was done. "What about the Wilkins boy?" Flora asked directly, turning to face the gossips. The women looked startled, then embarrassed at being caught. The older one, whom Flora recognized as the banker's wife, recovered first. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackburn. We shouldn't be speaking of such things." "Please," Flora insisted. "If there's something I should know about my husband, I'd rather hear it directly than through whispers." The women exchanged glances. Then the younger one, emboldened perhaps by Flora's apparent ignorance, spoke. "It was 3 years ago. Young Sam Wilkins worked at the Blackburn Ranch. He was caught stealing from Mr. Blackburn just a few dollars, they say. Mr. Blackburn had him whipped in front of the other hands as an example." Her voice dropped even lower. "The boy couldn't use his right arm properly afterward, had to move back east to live with relatives." Flora felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to reject the story outright, but something in the woman's tone rang with conviction. "That's enough, Martha," Mrs. Jennings cut in sharply. "You shouldn't be repeating such things." "She asked," Martha defended herself, "and it's the truth. Everyone knows it." "You don't know anything," came Tucker's cold voice from behind them. The women jumped, turning to find him standing there, his expression thunderous. "You repeat gossip and call it truth." Martha had the grace to look ashamed, but the banker's wife lifted her chin defiantly. "The boy left town with scars on his back, Mr. Blackburn. That's not gossip." Tucker's jaw tightened dangerously. "The boy left town with $50 in his pocket and a letter of recommendation to my cousin's business in St. Louis. His injuries came from falling drunk from his horse the night before he stole from me, not from any whipping." His eyes were cold with controlled anger. "But you wouldn't know that part of the story, would you, Mrs. Phillips? It's not nearly as entertaining." An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. Flora stood frozen, uncertain what to believe. "Are you finished selecting your fabrics, Mrs. Blackburn?" Tucker asked, his voice carefully controlled. Flora nodded mutely. "Then I believe we're done here." Tucker turned to Mr. Jennings, who had been watching the exchange with evident discomfort. "Send the bill to the ranch, and the wire I ordered." Without another word, Tucker placed his hand at the small of Flora's back, guiding her from the store. Neither spoke until they were back in the wagon and heading out of town. "Is it true?" Flora finally asked, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. "About the Wilkins boy?" Tucker kept his eyes on the road. "Which part? That he stole from me?" "Yes, that I had him whipped." "No." His knuckles whitened on the reins. "I caught him taking money from my office. He'd been drinking, fell from his horse the night before, injured his shoulder. I fired him, gave him enough money to get to St. Louis, and wrote to my cousin to give him work there." "Then why would people say such things?" Tucker's laugh was humorless. "Because it's a better story, Mrs. Blackburn, because people prefer to believe the worst of me." "Why?" Flora pressed. "Why do they fear you so much?" For a long moment Tucker was silent. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from some deep place within him, he spoke. "When I first came to this valley, it was lawless. Rustlers, bandits, men who took what they wanted through violence. I built this ranch during those times, and yes, I defended it sometimes harshly. I've killed men who tried to steal my cattle or threaten my workers. I've made enemies of people who thought they could force me off my land." He glanced at her. "I won't apologize for protecting what's mine." "And now," Flora asked, "the territory has lawmen now, courts. Now I'm wealthy and powerful, and that creates its own kind of enemies." Tucker's expression hardened. "Men like Jeremiah Harrington, who wants my water rights. Men who resent success they couldn't achieve themselves." Flora considered his words. There was logic in them, even truth, but they didn't fully explain the pervasive fear she'd witnessed in town. "The stories about you, the fire at the Hamilton place, the Wilkins boy, they seem to follow a pattern," she observed. "People who oppose you suffer misfortunes, and then you benefit." Tucker's hands tightened on the reins. "Coincidences, nothing more, but convenient ones for building my reputation as someone not to be crossed." His voice took on an edge. "A reputation that has kept this ranch and everyone on it safe for 15 years. The rest of the journey passed in silence, Tucker lost in his thoughts, Flora in hers. She found herself believing him about the Wilkins boy. There had been genuine anger in his denial, not at being caught in a lie but at the injustice of the accusation. But the other stories, the Hamilton fire, the mysterious accidents that befell those who opposed Tucker Blackburn's interests. She couldn't be certain. That night, unable to sleep, Flora slipped downstairs to the library. To her surprise, a light was already burning there, and she found Tucker seated in his usual chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the dying fire. He looked up when she entered, and Flora was struck by the weariness in his face. In that unguarded moment he looked older, burdened by concerns he kept hidden in daylight hours. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Tucker gestured to the chair opposite his. "You're not disturbing me. Couldn't sleep." Flora shook her head, settling into the chair. "Too much on my mind, I suppose. The stories you heard today," Tucker guessed correctly. "Yes," Flora admitted, "and trying to reconcile them with the man I've come to know this past week." Tucker took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes returning to the fire. "And what man is that, Mrs. Blackburn?" Flora chose her words carefully. "A complex one, hard in some ways, yes, demanding, but also fair, considerate in unexpected moments." She hesitated, then added, "Not the monster of Copper Creek's gossip." A shadow of a smile touched Tucker's lips. "High praise indeed." "It's not praise, merely observation," Flora corrected him. "I'm still trying to understand why my father felt this marriage was his only option, why you wanted it." Tucker studied her for a long moment, then set his glass aside. "Your father's debts were significant." The bank was going to foreclose. As for why I wanted this marriage. He paused, seeming to search for words. I've been alone a long time, Mrs. Blackburn. This house, for all its size, feels empty. I'm not getting any younger and I want children. A family to inherit what I've built. There are many unmarried women in the territory, Flora pointed out. Women who wouldn't fear you. Perhaps, Tucker acknowledged. But none that interested me as you did. Flora felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. You hardly knew me. I knew enough. I saw a young woman with pride and spirit, who held her head high despite difficulties, who cared for her father even when he made poor decisions, who read books when she thought no one was watching in the general store. Something softened in Tucker's expression. A woman strong enough for this life. Flora was startled by this revelation that Tucker had noticed her, observed her, long before their marriage was arranged. The idea that he had selected her specifically, not merely as a convenient solution to her father's financial troubles, shifted something in her understanding of their situation. I didn't agree to marry you for your father's sake alone, Tucker continued. I could have simply paid his debts, taken his land. I wanted a wife. I wanted you. The directness of his statement left Flora momentarily speechless. She had assumed their marriage was purely transactional, her father's debts forgiven in exchange for Tucker gaining a young, presumably fertile wife to provide him with heirs. The notion that Tucker might have actually wanted her, specifically, had never occurred to her. You're shocked, Tucker observed, a hint of dry amusement in his voice. I am, Flora admitted. I assumed this was merely a business arrangement for you. It is that in part, Tucker conceded. I'm a practical man, but I wouldn't bring just any woman into my home, my life. He leaned forward slightly. I want this marriage to work, Flora, not just as a means to an end, but as a true partnership. In time, perhaps even more. The use of her given name, so rare from his lips, emphasized the personal nature of his declaration. Flora found herself at a loss for how to respond. Part of her, the part that had feared and resented Tucker Blackburn, wanted to reject his overture outright. But another part, growing stronger with each day spent observing the man behind the fearsome reputation, was willing to consider the possibility. I don't know if I can give you what you want, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. But I'm willing to try to make this marriage work as a partnership at least. Something like relief flickered in Tucker's eyes. That's all I ask for now. Time and a fair chance. Flora nodded, feeling as though some invisible barrier between them had shifted, not broken, but perhaps thinned. It's late, Tucker said, rising from his chair. We should both try to get some sleep. Flora stood as well, suddenly aware of his proximity, of the intimate nature of their conversation in the quiet, firelit room. Good night, Mr. Blackburn. Tucker, he corrected gently. If we're to be partners, you might as well use my name. Tucker, Flora repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. Good night. Good night, Flora. He hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers warm against her skin. The touch was brief, almost tentative, but it sent an unexpected shiver through her. Flora returned to her room with her thoughts in greater turmoil than before. The man who had just shared his hopes with her, who had touched her with such careful gentleness, seemed a world apart from the cold, feared figure of Copper Creek's gossip. Yet they were one and the same, and Flora found herself increasingly drawn to unravel the contradictions that made up Tucker Blackburn. Summer heat settled over the ranch as May gave way to June. Flora gradually assumed more responsibilities in the household, much to Mrs. Winter's satisfaction. The older woman, initially standoffish, had warmed considerably, offering guidance without condescension as Flora learned the intricacies of managing such a large home. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Mrs. Winters remarked one morning as they planned the week's menus. "Better than I expected, if I'm being honest." "What did you expect?" Flora asked, curious despite herself. Mrs. Winters snorted. "Some simpering miss who'd faint at the sight of blood and couldn't tell a potato from a turnip. The kind of girl who marries for money and security." "I didn't choose this marriage," Flora reminded her. "No, but you're making the best of it." Mrs. Winters gave her an appraising look. "And you're good for him. He's different since you came." "Different how?" Flora couldn't help asking. The housekeeper considered this. "Less closed off. He talks more at dinner. Sometimes I even catch him smiling when you're not looking." She shook her head. "Never thought I'd see the day." Flora felt a curious warmth at these words. It was true that Tucker had been more open in recent weeks, more inclined to conversation. Their evening discussions in the library had become a regular occurrence, ranging from books they'd both read to the operations of the ranch, which Tucker explained with patience and evident pleasure in her interest. There remained boundaries between them, of course. Tucker was still reserved by nature, still kept certain parts of himself carefully guarded. And while their interactions had grown more comfortable, even warm at times, he had made no move to claim his marital rights, maintaining his separate bedroom at the end of the hall. Flora found herself conflicted about this continued separation. On one hand, she appreciated his respect for her need for time and space. On the other, as her fear of Tucker gradually gave way to respect and a growing affection, she sometimes wondered if his restraint indicated a lack of desire rather than consideration. These thoughts occupied her one afternoon as she rode out to deliver lunch to Tucker and his men, who were repairing a section of fence damaged in a recent storm. Mrs. Winters had packed a basket with sandwiches, pie, and a jug of cold lemonade, and Flora had volunteered to bring it, welcoming the chance to escape the house on such a fine day. She found the men working in the hot sun, Tucker alongside them, his shirt darkened with sweat as he drove fence posts into the hard ground. He looked up at her approach, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Flora," he said, setting down his mallet and wiping his brow. "What brings you out here?" She held up the basket. "Mrs. Winters thought you might appreciate some lunch. It's hot work you're doing." The men gathered eagerly, thanking her as she distributed the food. Tucker stood slightly apart, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was thoughtful," he said when she brought him a sandwich and a cup of lemonade. "Thank you." "It's nothing," Flora said, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "I wanted the ride anyway. The day's too beautiful to spend indoors." Tucker nodded, looking out over the rolling grasslands, golden in the summer sun. "It is at that." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the men relax in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. "You've settled in well," Tucker observed. "Mrs. Winters says you're a natural at running the household." Flora smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I enjoy it, actually. It's satisfying to make order from chaos." "A skill I appreciate," Tucker said, his eyes warm. "The ranch ran well enough before, but there's a comfort to the house now that wasn't there." "High praise from Tucker Blackburn," Flora teased, surprising herself with her boldness. A smile tugged at his mouth. "I'm not completely incapable of recognizing improvement, Mrs. Blackburn." "Flora," she reminded him, "if we're to be partners, you might as well use my name." His smile widened at her echo of his words from weeks before. "Flora," he repeated, his voice warming the syllables. "I like hearing you say my name." The simple admission sent a flutter through her stomach. There was an undeniable connection growing between them, something tentative but real. The moment was broken by Hank approaching with news of a stray calf spotted nearby. Tucker immediately shifted back to his role as ranch owner, discussing with his foreman the best approach to retrieve the animal. Flora packed up the remains of lunch, declining Tucker's offer to escort her back to the house. "I know the way," she assured him, "and you have work to finish." As she rode back, Flora reflected on their interaction, on the ease that had developed between them. The man she had feared 2 months ago had become someone she looked forward to seeing each day, someone whose rare smiles she treasured. She wondered, with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, where this evolving relationship might lead. That evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. Tucker returned late from the range, tired but satisfied with the day's work. After dinner, they retreated as usual to the library, where a fire had been lit to ward off the unusual chill that had accompanied the approaching storm. "The new fence section is holding well," Tucker told her as they settled into their customary chairs. "Should withstand whatever this storm brings." "You worked hard today," Flora observed. "You must be tired." Tucker stretched slightly, rotating his shoulders. "It's a good kind of tired, honest work. For a wealthy rancher, you spend a lot of time doing the same work as your hands," Flora noted. "I never want to be the kind of man who forgets what it means to work the land himself," Tucker said simply. "My father taught me that. He believed a man should never ask others to do what he wouldn't do himself." "He sounds like a wise man." Tucker nodded, his expression softening with memory. "He was hard but fair, much like your father, I'd imagine." Flora considered this. "My father was different before my mother died, stronger, more certain." She sighed. "Her death broke something in him that never quite mended." "Some wounds never fully heal," Tucker said quietly. "We just learn to carry them." The understanding in his voice touched something in Flora. "What wounds do you carry, Tucker?" she asked softly. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Just when Flora thought he wouldn't answer, he spoke. "When I was 12, my parents hired a foreman named Garrett. He seemed competent enough at first, but after a few months, things began to disappear. Small items at first, then cattle. My father confronted him and Garrett attacked him." Tucker's voice remained steady, but Flora could see tension in his jaw. "I tried to help, but I was just a boy. Garrett knocked me aside easily. Would have killed my father if my mother hadn't shot him." Flora's eyes widened. "Your mother?" Tucker nodded. "She was a genteel woman in many ways, but frontier life had made her practical. She kept a pistol and knew how to use it." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "The sheriff ruled its self-defense, of course, but the town talked. Some said my father had provoked Garrett, that my mother had murdered him in cold blood." "That's terrible," Flora said, understanding dawning. "Is that when people began to fear your family?" "Fear came later," Tucker said. "That was just the beginning of the whispers. After my parents died and I took over the ranch, I had to fight to keep it. The bank tried to foreclose. Rustlers took advantage of what they saw as weakness. Neighboring ranchers made insulting offers for the land." His expression hardened. "I fought back, sometimes hard. I made examples of men who tried to steal from me, and yes, I cultivated a reputation for being someone not to cross." "And the Hamilton fire?" Flora asked, unable to help herself. "Did you have anything to do with that?" Tucker met her gaze directly. "No. But I didn't correct people who assumed I did." His honesty was stark, unapologetic. "Fear kept my ranch safe when I was building it. It kept my men from being harassed in town. It kept predatory men like Jeremiah Harrington from thinking I was easy prey." Outside, thunder rumbled, closer now. The first spatters of rain hit the library windows. "And now," Flora asked, "do you still need that fear?" Tucker considered her question seriously. "Less than before," he admitted. "The ranch is established. I have good men working for me, loyal men. The territory has proper law now." He glanced at her. "And I find myself caring more lately about being respected than feared." The simple statement revealed a shift in Tucker that Flora found deeply affecting. This was a man capable of growth, of change, not the immovable force she had initially believed him to be. "I respect you," Flora said softly. "I didn't expect to, but I do." Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, surprise, pleasure, and something warmer. "That means more to me than you might guess." The storm broke in earnest then, rain lashing against the windows, thunder cracking overhead. Flora jumped slightly at a particularly loud boom, and Tucker rose from his chair. "I should check that the windows are secure upstairs," he said. "These summer storms can be fierce." Flora nodded, rising as well. "I'll help." They moved through the house together, checking latches on windows and doors. In Flora's bedroom, a window had blown open, rain soaking the curtains and floor. "I'll get it," Tucker said, crossing to close and latch it firmly. He turned to find Flora gathering towels from her washstand to mop up the water. "Here," he said, taking one of the towels and kneeling to help her. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the storm raging outside. When the floor was dry, Tucker stood, holding the damp towels awkwardly. "I'll take these to the laundry room," Flora offered, reaching for them. As she took the towels, her fingers brushed his. Tucker didn't immediately let go, and for a breathless moment, they stood connected by the simple touch. Eyes locked. Lightning flashed, illuminating Tucker's face in stark relief, the strong line of his jaw, the unexpected vulnerability in his eyes. Without conscious thought, Flora swayed slightly toward him. Tucker's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "Flora," he murmured, her name a question. In answer, Flora leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. Tucker hesitated only a moment before lowering his head to press his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a careful exploration. But when Flora responded, stepping closer and letting the towels drop forgotten to the floor, Tucker's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. The kiss deepened, igniting something warm and unfamiliar in Flora's core. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you rode out to the fence line," he admitted, his voice rough. Flora smiled, a new confidence flowing through her. "Why didn't you?" "I didn't want to push you, didn't want you to feel obligated." His hands tightened slightly at her waist. "This marriage began as an arrangement, but I want more than duty from you, Flora, much more." The raw honesty in his voice touched her deeply. This was not the calculating businessman who had arranged their marriage, but a man revealing genuine feeling, making himself vulnerable. "I want more too," Flora whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. Somewhere in these weeks of living alongside Tucker Blackburn, of witnessing his complexity, his strength and unexpected gentleness, her fear had transformed into something else entirely: respect, affection, and now desire. Tucker's eyes darkened at her words. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his restraint visibly fraying. Flora responded eagerly, her arms twining around his neck, her body pressing closer. When Tucker finally pulled back, his breathing uneven, it was clearly an effort. "I should go," he said, though his hands remained at her waist. "Before I—" "Stay," Flora said simply, summoning her courage. "Please." Tucker searched her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. Finding none, he brushed his thumb gently across her lower lip. "Are you sure?" "I don't want you to feel rushed." "I'm sure," Flora said, her voice stronger now. "I want to be your wife, Tucker, in every way." His control broke then, and he claimed her mouth in a kiss of searing intensity, lifting her easily and carrying her to the bed. What followed was a discovery of each other, tender and passionate by turns. Tucker was a considerate lover, attuned to her responses, patient with her inexperience. In his arms, Flora found pleasures she had never imagined and a connection that transcended the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the storm still raging outside but somehow distant, unimportant. Tucker's fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder, his expression more open, more peaceful than she had ever seen it. "Stay," Flora murmured, echoing her earlier request. Tucker pressed a kiss to her forehead. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Morning found them still entwined, sunlight streaming through the window that Tucker had secured the night before. Flora woke first, momentarily disoriented by the warm weight of Tucker's arm draped across her waist, his steady breathing against her neck. Reality returned quickly: the storm, their confessions, the night they had shared. A blush heated her cheeks at the memories, but with it came a deep contentment. For the first time since arriving at the Blackburn Ranch, she felt truly at home. Tucker stirred, his arm tightening around her. "Morning," he murmured, his voice sleep-roughened. Flora turned in his embrace to face him, struck anew by how different he looked in these unguarded moments, younger somehow, the habitual sternness softened by sleep and intimacy. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy despite their closeness. Tucker smiled, seeming to sense her uncertainty. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Flora shook her head. "None." Relief flickered in his eyes, followed by something deeper, warmer. "Good," he said simply, and kissed her. They might have lingered longer, but the distant sound of activity from downstairs reminded them of the day's responsibilities. With reluctance, they rose and dressed, exchanging glances and small touches that held the promise of more to come. When they entered the dining room together for breakfast, Mrs. Winters took one look at them and gave a satisfied nod, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. She said nothing, but there was a knowing gleam in her eye as she served them. "The storm did some damage to the south pasture fence," Tucker told Flora as they ate. "I'll be riding out with the men to repair it." "I could come with you," Flora offered. "Help with lunch again." Tucker smiled, pleased by her suggestion. "I'd like that." The ease between them was new and precious, a shared secret that sustained them through the mundane tasks of the day. When Flora rode out at midday with the lunch basket, the ranch hands exchanged knowing glances but respectfully kept their observations to themselves. The pattern of their days shifted subtly after that night. Tucker moved his belongings to Flora's room, their room now, and they fell into the rhythm of a true marriage. Flora continued to take on more responsibilities for the household, making it truly her domain, while Tucker included her more in discussions about the ranch's operations. In the evenings, they still retired to the library, but now they often shared a single chair, Flora nestled against Tucker's chest as they read or talked. These quiet hours became the heart of their days, a time for connection and deepening understanding. Summer ripened toward harvest, the days growing shorter as August turned to September. Flora found herself increasingly at home on the Blackburn Ranch, forming friendships with the wives of the married hands, earning the respect of the cowboys with her horsemanship and practical nature. One crisp autumn morning, Flora woke feeling unusually tired, a slight queasiness unsettling her stomach. She dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the symptoms persisted for several days, Mrs. Winters fixed her with a shrewd look across the breakfast table. "When was your last monthly, girl?" The housekeeper asked bluntly when Tucker had left for the day. Flora blushed at the direct question, then did a quick calculation. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. "Almost 7 weeks ago," she whispered, Mrs. Winters nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Thought as much. Best see Doc Wilson to be sure, but I'd say congratulations are in order. Flora pressed her hands to her stomach, a mixture of wonder and trepidation washing over her. A child. Tucker's child. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and deeply right. She waited until that evening to tell him, after dinner when they were alone in the library. Tucker was reading through some cattle breeding records, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Tucker," Flora said, her voice slightly unsteady, "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, setting the papers aside. "What is it?" Flora took a deep breath. "I think, that is, Mrs. Winters believes, I'm with child." Tucker went absolutely still, his expression blank with shock. For a terrible moment, Flora feared he was disappointed that he wasn't ready for this development. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not his usual restrained curve of lips, but a full, radiant expression of joy that transformed his entire countenance. "A baby?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our baby," Flora nodded, tears of relief and happiness pricking her eyes. "Yes." In 2 strides, Tucker crossed to her chair, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. He held her carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious beyond measure. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "You're giving me a family." The wonder in his voice brought fresh tears to Flora's eyes. In that moment, she realized how deeply lonely Tucker's life had been before her arrival, how much he had yearned for what most took for granted, a family to love, to protect, to pass his legacy to. "Yes," she said, holding him tightly. "A family." Tucker drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "Are you happy about this?" "Truly," Flora nodded, surprised by the depth of her own joy. "I am. I never expected to be, but I am." Tucker kissed her then, pouring all his emotion into the gesture. When they parted, he rested a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he said simply. The news of Flora's pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch, met with genuine congratulations from the Hands and their families. Mrs. Winters became even more protective of Flora, insisting on proper nutrition and adequate rest, while Tucker hovered with endearing concern, ready to fulfill her every whim. "You're going to spoil me," Flora protested one evening when Tucker returned from town with a rocking chair he'd specially ordered from Denver. "That's my intention," he replied unrepentantly, placing the chair in a warm corner of their bedroom. "You and our child deserve everything I can give you." As autumn deepened toward winter, Flora's pregnancy progressed without complications. Her body changed, rounding with the new life growing within, and Tucker's fascination with these changes was a source of both embarrassment and deep pleasure for Flora. "You're more beautiful than ever," he told her one night as they lay together, his hand gently caressing the curve of her stomach. "Sometimes I can't believe how fortunate I am." "That we are," Flora corrected, covering his hand with her own. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Tucker." "Not when I first came here." A shadow crossed his face at the reminder of their difficult beginning. "I've never told you, but I almost didn't go through with it," he admitted. "When I saw how afraid you were of me that day, I nearly called the whole thing off." "Why didn't you?" Flora asked, genuinely curious. Tucker was quiet for a moment. "Because I saw something else too, courage, determination. You were afraid, yes, but you were facing that fear with your head high." His fingers threaded through hers. "I admired that. I thought, this is a woman strong enough to stand beside me to help build something lasting." The simple honesty of his words touched Flora deeply. "And now, what do you think now?" Tucker's eyes, usually so guarded, shone with undisguised emotion. "That I love you, Flora Blackburn. More than I ever thought possible." It was the first time he had spoken the words aloud, though his actions had long conveyed the sentiment. Flora's heart swelled with answering emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "Despite everything, because of everything, I love you." Their child was born on a snowy February morning in 1877, a healthy boy with Tucker's dark hair and Flora's clear blue eyes. They named him Harrison Thomas Blackburn, in honor of both their fathers. "He's perfect," Tucker murmured, holding his son with careful hands that had worked cattle and built fences but now cradled new life with infinite gentleness. Flora watched them, exhausted but filled with a happiness that seemed too large to contain. This was her family, the husband she had once feared but now loved beyond measure, and the child they had created together. 2 weeks after Harrison's birth, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Blackburn Ranch, Flora's father. Harrison Newsom looked older, more careworn than when Flora had last seen him, but there was a cautious hope in his eyes as Tucker led him to the nursery. "Flora," he said hesitantly from the doorway, "I hope it's all right that I've come." Flora, seated in her rocking chair with Harrison at her breast, looked up in surprise. "Papa." Tucker moved to stand protectively behind her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Your father wrote asking to visit," he explained. "I thought it might be a good surprise for you." Harrison Newsom stepped awkwardly into the room, his hat clutched in weathered hands. "I've been a fool," he said bluntly, "letting you go like that, not even coming to see you settled." His eyes dropped to the nursing infant. "Is that my grandson?" Flora nodded, adjusting her shawl to better cover herself as Harrison finished nursing. "Would you like to hold him? His name is Harrison after you." Tears welled in her father's eyes. He crossed the room and carefully took the swaddled infant, looking down into the tiny face with wonder. "He's beautiful, Flora. You've done well." He glanced up at Tucker. "Both of you." Tucker nodded acknowledgement, his expression reserved but not unfriendly. "Your daughter has made my house a home, Mr. Newsom, and given me a son to carry on my name. I'd say I'm the fortunate one." An understanding passed between the two men, not forgiveness exactly, but a mutual recognition of what mattered most. Flora's happiness and the future represented by the child in Harrison Newsom's arms. "How are things at the home place, Papa?" Flora asked, breaking the moment. Harrison sighed. "Struggling, to be honest. The drought's eased some, but I'm not as young as I was." "Stay for supper," Tucker said unexpectedly. "We can talk about it. Perhaps there's a way we could work together. I've been looking to expand our operation." The offer was more than a business proposition, it was an olive branch. A chance for Flora's father to remain a part of her life without sacrificing his pride. That evening, as they sat around the dining table, Tucker, Flora with Harrison sleeping in a cradle nearby, Harrison Newsom, and Mrs. Winters, Flora felt the final pieces of her new life falling into place. The journey from frightened bride to confident wife and mother had been unexpected, fraught with challenges and revelations. She had discovered strength she hadn't known she possessed, and found love where she had least expected it. As she looked at Tucker across the table, catching his eye and sharing a private smile, Flora remembered the girl she had been standing at the edge of her father's property, telegram in hand, certain that marrying Tucker Blackburn would be the end of her happiness. Instead, it had been just the beginning. Years later, when Harrison was 5 and his sisters Catherine and Elizabeth were 3 and 1, visitors to the Blackburn Ranch often remarked on the obvious devotion between Tucker and Flora. The fearsome reputation that had once defined Tucker Blackburn had gradually softened, replaced by respect for a fair businessman, a generous neighbor, and a devoted family man. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, expanding thoughtfully rather than aggressively. Harrison Newsom became a partner in the operation, managing a section of the property with renewed purpose and pride. On warm summer evenings, Tucker and Flora could often be found on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the land they both loved. Tucker's arm would be around his wife's shoulders, his expression peaceful in a way few would have believed possible in earlier years. "Any regrets?" he sometimes asked her, a teasing echo of that first morning they had spent together. And Flora would always answer the same way, leaning into his embrace, secure in the knowledge that behind his once feared exterior was a heart capable of profound love and unwavering loyalty. "None," she would say. "None at all."